Hey friends, slide off your day like a dusty cloak. Grab your coziest blanket and settle into that perfect listening spot. If you're new here, welcome to the corner of YouTube where curiosity meets comfort. And if you've been wandering these midnight halls with me for a while, welcome back. Feel free to tap the like button only if what we do together truly helps you wind down. And drop a quick note in the comments telling me where in the world you're listening from and whether it's tea time, lunchtime, or the whisper-soft hours past midnight. Now dim the lights. Let the hum of an old fan or the whir of your air conditioner become tonight's lullaby. And let's amble into a story that smells faintly of barley, wood smoke, and the happy clink of wooden mugs. Because long before beer became a weekend indulgence, it was a life-saving potion that stood between medieval villages and the very real menace of filthy water. Let's wander into a medieval brewery for a moment. It's dawn, and smoky beams of sunlight slant through high rafters. You'll hear the thunk of wooden paddles stirring mash in a huge copper cauldron, the hiss of steam, and the distant bleat of goats wondering why humans wake up so early. Brewing was equal parts craft and choreography. First came malting, soaking barley until it sprouted, then drying it over low fires to unlock its sugars. Those sugars were the yeast's buffet later on. Next, the malt was crushed, mixed with warm water, and heated. Brewers called this the mash, until the liquid turned sweet. That sweetness, now called wort, was drained, boiled, and seasoned with herbs. If hops grew nearby, great. If not, they tossed in groot, a spicy mix of yarrow, rosemary, or bog myrtle. Finally, the wort cooled in open vats, yeast drifted in, or was pitched in from a previous batch, and fermentation bubbled away for a day or two. The brewer tapped a cloudy, faintly frothy drink, nutritious, hydrating, and safer than whatever lurked in the muddy creek beyond the walls. Notice I said a day or two. Medieval ale moved fast. Without refrigeration or modern sanitation, a batch turned sour after a week. That's why most villages had multiple brewings each month, and why households often possessed a brown cauldron expressly for their own small beer. Brewing wasn't just an industry, it was part of domestic rhythm, like baking bread or mending clothes. In fact, many towns granted alewives the right to brew and sell surplus from their doorsteps. These women, often wearing tall white coifs and sturdy aprons, became micro-entrepreneurs, monitoring bubbling tubs while minding toddlers and gossiping with customers. Their brew not only kept neighbors hydrated, but also created a miniature economy that rippled through market squares and manor kitchens. Now, picture a pilgrim road snaking through damp English countryside, dotted with travelers bound for Canterbury. By law and custom, every few miles there's an inn, and that innkeeper's first duty isn't soft beds or roast chicken. It's decent ale. Thirsty, footsore pilgrims swallow pints not for merriment alone, but because they can't trust the roadside streams where oxen wade ankle-deep. In Germany, monasteries perfect this duty of care. Benedictine and Cistercian monks tinker with recipes, inventing box and double box, refining filtration, measuring gravity in ways we'd later call specific. Their rule of hospitality dictates that guests receive a safe, nourishing drink, and the brothers are nothing if not overachievers. Meanwhile, civic governments notice something striking. Towns with reliable brewmasters have fewer outbreaks of waterborne disease. In 15th century London, the city council starts licensing alehouses, not just to tax them, but to assure quality. A bad brewer whose weak mash or dirty barrels cause sickness can face fines or the pillory. The dreaded ale conner, a kind of sudsy inspector, literally wades into taverns wearing leather breeches, pours ale onto a bench, sits down, and waits. If sugary residue glues his trousers to the seat, the beer's under-fermented, and the brewer gets a lecture by public humiliation. Medieval QA testing, uncomfortable but effective. But beer's impact wasn't confined to daily hydration. Think about crises, sieges, plagues, famine years when granaries ran thin and morale thinner. During the Black Death of the 14th century, 1 in 3 Europeans perished. Yet monasteries noted fewer deaths among brothers who stuck to their in-house brews. Some chroniclers attributed divine favor. Modern scholars suspect sanitation. The plague spread by fleas and crowded living, but secondary infections soared when survivors drank fouled water. Beer, boiled and fermented, formed an invisible moat around those who kept a mug close at hand. Fast forward to winter, when wells freeze and snowmelt turns rivers into sluggish sludge. Villages hole up behind stockpiled firewood. Here, small beer shines brightest. Boiled grains yield calories. Yeast contribute B vitamins. The mild alcohol calls nerves when January nights stretch eternal. Parents ladle warm ale gruel to children like a proto-hot chocolate, saving scarce firewood otherwise needed to boil dubious water day after day. In diary fragments from the Low Countries, we read of mothers praising God's barley cup for keeping coughs at bay and spirits lifted until spring. We should pause for a small reality check. Beer did not end all illness. Cholera, unknown in Europe until later centuries, still swept cities where sewage systems lagged. Typhoid lurked in contaminated milk. And yes, overindulgence led to its own problems. Medieval sermons are packed with warnings about drunkenness, sloth, and brawls sparked by too many evening tankards. Yet even the most sermon-happy preacher grudgingly conceded that moderate ale was a gift. Saint Arnold of Soissons, an 11th century bishop, urged followers to drink beer, not water. And legend claims he miraculously saved villagers from plague by handing out blessed brew. Skeptics roll their eyes, but statistics whisper that he might have had a point. The domino effect of safe beverage culture went deeper than health. Take workforce productivity. A medieval mason can't carve cathedral stones if dysentery pins him to a latrine. A whole guild's timeline slips, wages vanish, and the town square's new bell tower never rises. Swap in beer as the daily drink, and stomach cramps recede. Building schedules stabilize, and the tower eventually rings across rooftops. Multiply that by hundreds of towns, and beer quietly fuels an architectural boom. Economics? Brewing demanded grain, fuel, barrels, and labor. That meant jobs for coopers, field hands, woodcutters, and carters. A single urban brewery in 14th century Hamburg might employ dozens full-time and support hundreds indirectly. Tax revenue from ale sales financed bridges, walls, and orphanages. Some historians argue that reliable tax flows from brewing allowed early city councils to professionalize night watchmen, paving streets, and hire teachers. Tiny steps toward modern civic life, all bubbling up from a frothy vat. Culturally, beer became the social glue that water could never be. Market day ended with communal cups. Weddings featured ceremonial ale toasts. Harvest celebrations introduced the ale pole, an ancestor of the maypole, decked in hops and ribbons. Folks swapped stories, wooed sweethearts, concluded deals, and occasionally plotted revolts over shared pitchers. When anger flared at unfair tithes or corrupt bailiffs, meetings happened in alehouses, the medieval equivalent of coffee shop politics. Safe drink equaled safe assembly, which in turn nurtured ideas big enough to rattle kings. Speaking of kings, royalty noticed too. Edward III of England granted monopolies to favored breweries, partly for revenue, partly to ensure his soldiers marched with reliable liquid rations. On campaign, barrels of ale rode beside bolts of arrows and sacks of hardtack. A knight dehydrated from diarrhea is no knight at all. A squire warmed by small beer can swing a sword. Records from Agincourt list more barrels than bows. Logistics officers, centuries before germ theory, treated beer as a strategic asset. Potable, packable, and morale-boosting. We haven't even touched on flavor evolutions. As trade routes spread, exotic spices, cinnamon, cloves, even pepper, sneaked into specialty batches, turning medical necessity into culinary adventure. In the Hanseatic cities, brewers competed for bragging rights. Whose small beer stayed fresh on the longest sea voyage? Whose March beer kept best into summer's heat? Each experiment, each tweak, pushed brewing closer to a science that would later birth pilsners, stouts, and IPAs. But at its core, the mission remained simple: make water safer by transforming it into something tastier and sturdier. Let's zoom out to see one last ripple effect: population growth. Medieval demographers note spikes in birth rates after communities adopted large-scale brewing. Fewer infants died of waterborne scourges. Mothers stayed hydrated and nourished during breastfeeding. Villages could support larger households, which meant more hands in the fields, which meant surplus crops, which meant trade, which meant merchant classes, which meant universities. You could sketch a crooked line from a bubbling mash tun to the doors of Oxford and Bologna, where scholars debated Aristotle while sipping ale between lectures. Clean water might have done the same, but in the centuries before chlorination, beer filled the gap. Yet, for all its life-saving power, beer remained wonderfully ordinary. Picture a twilight scene. A miller trudges home, flour dust drifting off his shoulders like pale snow. He lifts a wooden mug, takes a deep swallow, and feels the day's grit wash away in malty warmth. He doesn't ponder microbes or municipal finance. He just knows this drink won't send him running to the woods in the dark. Safety has never tasted so simple, and that simplicity is why entire villages endured. So, as your eyelids grow heavier and the soft clatter of 21st century life fades into the crackle of a medieval hearth, remember this: sometimes the heroes of history aren't knights or inventors. Sometimes they're tiny yeast cells munching sugars, or patient hands steering paddles through steaming mash, or a wise mother shooing children away from the well and toward a humble pewter cup. Beer didn't just add cheer to the Middle Ages. It quietly, steadily, preservingly kept hope alive, one sip at a time. Steam curls upward from the copper vat while dawn's first light nudges stained glass windows into glowing ruby and gold. A barefoot novice hustles past, arms full of firewood, and somewhere in the cloister a bell tolls prime. Welcome inside a medieval monastery where prayer meets practical chemistry and where beer, humble, holy, and endlessly experimental, evolved from mere village lifesaver into the liquid cornerstone of half a continent's survival strategy. Monks didn't invent beer, but they elevated it the way a choir lifts plain chant, with discipline, repetition, and a dash of inspired tinkering.
Each Benedictine or Cistercian house kept meticulous ledgers of grain weights, boil times, and fermentation days, turning guesswork into protocol. Unlike lay brewers fretting over household fires and toddler mischief, monks could devote serene hours to refining mash temperatures or figuring why one oak barrel soured while its twin stayed sweet. They even read their Bibles through a brewer's lens. Remember St. Paul's advice to Timothy? Take a little wine for thy stomach's sake. Swap wine for ale in Northern Europe, and monks took the hint.
These cloistered scientists soon noticed an herb sprouting along monastery walls, Humulus lupulus, the hop. At first, villagers eyed hops suspiciously, muttering that the climbing vines looked like bony fingers grasping heaven. Herbalists warned it made goats drowsy. Yet monastery gardens tested everything God grew, so brothers steeped hop cones into batches and discovered a revelation. Bitterness balanced sweetness, and, more importantly, the beer lasted longer. A cask hopped on Ascension Day was still crisp come harvest, whereas Groot Spice Ale went funky by midsummer. Preservation meant fewer brew days, steadier supply, and safer pilgrims' mugs. Word traveled faster than a troubadour on market day. Soon secular towns petitioned for monk's beer, though many guilds resisted, fearing hops would upend the spice trade. In 1516, Bavaria settled the debate with the Reinheitsgebot, decreeing that beer be made only from water, barley, and hops. Yeast wasn't named because, like angels, it was invisible yet everywhere.
Imagine the ripple effects. A single abbey might produce 50 barrels a week, enough to hydrate villagers, laborers on monastic estates, and throngs of travelers trudging pilgrim routes. During famine years, monks lent ale on credit, extending calories when bread ran short. During sieges, common as spring rains, defenders welcomed cartloads of holy casks, each pint cleaner than moat water, and infused with faint courage. Chroniclers describe besieged towns where soldiers rotated shifts. 2 hours on the battlements, 1 hour in the ale line, not for carousal but for sheer hydration. Dysentery undermined armies quicker than any catapult. Small beer kept bowmen on their feet.
Outside monastery walls, a quiet revolution brewed in backroom kitchens. Alewives, those entrepreneurial women in peaked hats and long braids, noticed demand rising for hopped ale. Some embraced the botanical newcomer. Others clung to the old Groot mix, partly because local lords taxed hop yards heavily. That tax sparked gossip that hops harbored witches' whispers. Superstitious neighbors claimed a bitter pint clouded men's minds and lured them into sinful idleness. In truth, what clouded most men's minds was the stronger festival ale, consumed without moderation or breakfast. But rumors stick. Generations later, when witch hunters grew zealous, the sight of an alewife's broom outside her door, practical signage that fresh brew awaited, morphed into witch-riding broomstick folklore. Thus, medicinal hops accidentally fed Europe's most infamous moral panic.
Meanwhile, cities swelled. London's mud paths became cobbled lanes echoing with cartwheels. Amsterdam dredged canals and crammed warehouses along their banks. Urban density multiplied water woes. Chamber pots emptied from upper windows, and tanners dumped limey hides straight into rivers. Enter municipal brewhouses, massive complexes where city councils hired master brewers, set quality controls, and guaranteed every resident a ration of pathogen-free drink at pennies a quart. These brewhouses were the medieval equivalent of public utilities. No one romanticized them, yet everyone relied on them more than candlelight or cobblers. One Hamburg register shows infants allocated half pints. Yes, infants, proving how deeply beer substituted for water.
Let's peek at the chemistry, unwritten then, obvious now. Boiling wort neutered cholera vibrio decades before cholera reached Europe. The mild acidity from carbonic and lactic acids dropped pH below bacteria's comfort zone. Alcohol, even at 2%, perforated bacterial membranes. Add hops' antimicrobial isoalpha acids, and you had a 3-layer defense more reliable than any city moat. Modern labs confirm that E. coli populations plummet in hopped solutions. Medieval folk did not read peer-reviewed journals. They read the obituary boards and noticed fewer black crosses beside ale drinkers' names. Economically, the hop craze reshaped landscapes. Monasteries and later merchant families planted vertical forests of vines along rivers with perfect microclimates: Elbe, Saale, Danube. Harvest season transformed valleys into fragrant carnivals. Children on ladders, women stripping cones into baskets, ox carts creaking under green gold. Dried hops traveled in linen bales to port towns where coopers hammered barrel hoops late into the night. A single bumper harvest could bankroll cathedral windows or navigation schools. Villages that once subsisted on rye now boasted hop kiln skylines, and fewer outbreaks of bloody flux, the polite term for murderous diarrhea. Culturally, beer seeped into ritual. At weddings, newlyweds shared a bridal ale, hence the word bridal. Farmhands received part of their wages in liquid form. 6 pints a day was standard in Norfolk's 14th century harvest contracts. Universities paid professors in ale allowances. Imagine grading parchment essays while cradling a stoneware mug. When plague waves ebbed, survivors held ale feasts of Thanksgiving, where each toast listed names of the lost before pledging to live more kindly, at least until the next round. Not every authority cheered. Some physicians, clinging to Galen's humors, argued that beer bred melancholy phlegm. They prescribed boiled water with oregano instead. Patients politely nodded, then queued at the ale bench. Temperance sermonizers decried tipsiness among apprentices, blaming hops for stirring base desires. Yet city records show crime dipping in wards where low-alcohol small beer replaced raw river water. Turns out it's hard to rob a cloth merchant while doubled over with dysentery. Across the North Sea, Norse communities adapted centuries-old mead halls into ale lodges, switching from honey, scarce, weather-dependent, to barley malt, reliable, storable. Saga fragments praise chieftains who kept clear ale flowing even in frost time. Archaeologists in Greenland found brew kettle shards beside Norse farmsteads, evidence that colonists braved polar nights with yeast as their ally. Where wells froze solid, snow melted into kettles served as brewing liquor, boiled safety included. We must also salute yeast, the invisible workforce. Monks inadvertently domesticated strains that favored cooler climates, laying groundwork for bottom-fermenting lagers centuries later in Bavaria. Brewers practiced krausening, pitching frothy yeast from a vigorous batch into fresh wort, an unwitting form of quality control and microbial continuity. Yeast became a family heirloom. Some lineages survived plagues, wars, even the Reformation's icon smashing. Today, geneticists trace modern brewing yeast back to a handful of medieval ancestors, proving that microbes carry history in their DNA as surely as manuscripts carry ink. Speaking of the Reformation, beer straddled confessional lines. Protestants demolished monasteries but kept the breweries, reasoning that God clearly blessed clean drink. Martin Luther's wife, Katharina von Bora, ran a legendary household brewery in Wittenberg. Luther praised her ale in letters more warmly than some of his theological allies. Catholic princelings responded by issuing brewing patents to loyal laymen, ensuring their domains remained both devout and hydrated. Thus, beer became ecumenical, a rare topic where foes could clink mugs after fiery debates, secure in shared immunity from water's lurking evils. Let's stroll to a bustling 15th century Paris quay. River barges unload bales of hops beside censers of incense and crates of Flemish cloth. A cooper rolls fresh barrels toward an alehouse sign depicting St. Arnold holding a mash paddle like a bishop's crosier. Inside, travelers shrug off cloaks damp with Seine mist, order wooden tankards, and swap rumors of a new sickness upriver. The innkeeper, savvy and motherly, quietly dilutes her stronger stock with small beer. Patrons stay merry, not rowdy, and the tavern avoids fines for disorder. Local doctors later note that outbreaks spared neighborhoods clustered around reputable alehouses. Coincidence? Hardly. On the household front, Brewing Day doubled as social hub. Women exchanged herbal lore. Add chamomile for calm infants, nettle for iron-boosting spring ale. Children chased chickens between vats, absorbing lessons as casually as nursery rhymes. Skim the scum, stir clockwise to honor the sun. Never let the mash scorch. These collective memories outlived plague wipes and dynastic wars. You can taste them today in farmhouse saisons and Norwegian kveik traditions, where yeast strains pass down like family stories. War inevitably marched back into the narrative. During the 100 Years' War, English captains reported fewer desertions in companies with steady ale supply. French commanders retaliated by burning hop yards to cripple English logistics, proof that beverage safety equaled military edge. Centuries later, when Spanish tercios clashed with Dutch rebels, diaries reveal soldiers gauging morale by the state of their beer ration. 3 stoop fresh, men cheerful. 1 stoop sour, murmurs grow. Water discipline alone could not steady nerves amid siege trenches. Only that reassuring malty tang signaled order in chaos. Finally, let's consider legacy. By 1600, Europe's birth rates climbed, urban populations doubled, and craft guilds codified skills from masonry to metalwork. None of it was possible if every second week half the workforce lay curled in straw shivering with fever from tainted wells. Beer, low in alcohol, high in safety, acted as the quiet infrastructure beneath cathedrals, universities, trade fairs, and households. It was the unseen aqueduct carrying clean hydration through centuries that lacked city plumbing. So next time you uncap a bottle or pull a pint, imagine the ghostly clink of thousands of medieval mugs raised in gratitude to yeast they never saw, monks they never met, and hop vines once deemed witchy weeds. Clean water is our modern birthright, but back then, salvation foamed amber in every cup. Salt-damp canvas snaps overhead, and gulls wheel against a pewter sky as the Santa Clara noses out of Lisbon's harbor, its hull trembling under the first restless swell of the open Atlantic. On deck, sailors tighten lines with tar-blackened hands, the boatswain's whistle slicing through the chill. Below, in the dim cargo hold where lantern light flickers over barrels stacked like sleeping giants, another sound rises. A soft, steady burble from casks of freshly brewed ship's beer. It's an almost secret noise, a muted heartbeat that will matter more than compass or sextant in the weeks ahead. because beyond that horizon, nothing is deadlier than thirst, fed by filthy water. Early explorers learned the lesson quickly and brutally. Fresh water sloshing in wooden casks turned sour within days, alive with wriggling things no eye could see. Crews who drank it staggered beneath fevers, their mouths cracked, bowels in revolt, making a mockery of imperial dreams. Beer, boiled and fermented before the anchor lifted, survived. Its dull glow of alcohol fought off rot, and the hops added preservative muscle. A pint a day became the sailor's lifeline, doling out calories and courage in equal measure. Ship's beer didn't taste like the nutty farmhouse ale back home. Salty air and bouncing seas knocked flavors sideways. But compared to brackish bilge water, it was paradise in a wooden cup. Listen to the ship's surgeon in his cramped cabin, quill scratching across a weather-spotted logbook. He notes 4 men sickened this morning from gulping rainwater pooled in a sail, yet none from the beer ration. The captain, stern and calculating, reduces water allowances and orders double barrels from the next port, chalking a tidy column of arithmetic that links modest beer cost to priceless crew survival. Maritime insurance brokers analyze similar figures in candlelit counting houses and soon demand proof of adequate beer supply before underwriting voyages. In this way, foamy pints become quiet stakeholders in the global age of discovery. Cross to the North Sea, where Dutch East India Company ships surge outward like a wooden fleet of ambitions. Their holds brim with Shapesbeer, a sturdier, higher gravity brew engineered to last months. Dutch brewers, many descended from the same monastic methods we met earlier, tweak mash thickness, boil time, and hop load until each barrel becomes a time capsule of safety. On reaching Java, sailors palm silver coins to local vendors for spices. But first, they toast the journey with the final ration, thanking yeast for safe passage more fervently than any saint. Beer's seaworthy reputation transforms colonial logistics. Spanish galleons bound for the New World experiment with cebada, an unfiltered wheat brew, while English privateers chasing treasure ships guzzle stale, a strong aged ale resilient against tropical heat. In Jamaica, ex-Army Cooper Samuel Morton establishes a coastal brewhouse specifically to provision passing fleets. His copper kettles roaring night and day while sugarcane fields rustle under Caribbean breezes. The economics are explosive. Hops cultivated in Kent find new markets across oceans. Coopers earn double wages, and port cities blossom around wharves that smell simultaneously of tar, salt, citrus, and fermenting grain. Yet not every shore greets beer as salvation. On the Yucatan Peninsula, Maya farmers raise eyebrows at frothy foreign drink, preferring their ancestral balche made from honey and tree bark. In the Andean highlands, Quechua women continue to brew chicha from maize, chewing kernels to release wild enzymes. Spanish encomenderos push barley plantings uphill, but altitude fights them. Malt dries slowly in thin air. Practical compromise arises. Hybrid brews blending European barley with local maize, a liquid treaty between worlds. Some missionaries quietly note that these hybrids, once boiled and fermented, reduce epidemics of bloody flux ravaging mining camps atop Potosi. The Imperial Ledger rarely credits indigenous knowledge, yet each sip carries a double genealogy. Old World yeast, New World grain, shared immunity. Back in Europe, street vendors hawking news broadsheets report wonders from abroad, exotic parrots, gold doubloons, and, intriguingly, survival tales credited to beer. urban scientists begin asking inconvenient questions. Why does boiled fermented liquor guard the gut? What are these invisible agents turning sugar into fizz? In Delft, Draper-turned-microscope wizard Antony van Leeuwenhoek peers through ground lenses and sketches animalcules squiggling in stagnant water but absent in fresh ale. He cannot name bacteria or yeast, yet his drawings make brewers nod knowingly. They've long sensed that life hides in foam. Royal courts catch the scent of prestige. Frederick the Great of Prussia found state-run breweries to ensure his armies never mimic earlier French regiments, who, during a sweltering summer campaign, drank river water, fell ill, and lost half a battle before clashing steel. Frederick orders military manuals updated. Along with musket drills, recruits must learn to tap casks and judge sourness by nose. Meanwhile, Catherine the Great invites English brewmasters to St. Petersburg to craft imperial stout, whose high alcohol and thick body survive weeks on frozen roads. These dark bottles eventually circle back to London taverns, hailed as proof that nothing, neither ice nor empire, can conquer beer's safeguarding chemistry. Cross the Atlantic again, this time northward to Plymouth Colony. The Mayflower's passengers, beleaguered by storms and scurvy, anchor sooner than planned, partly because their beer stores run low. Governor William Bradford later confesses that building a brewhouse is almost as urgent as erecting a palisade. Puritan diaries reveal a paradox. Stern sermons warn against drunkenness, yet a midday mug of table beer is considered prudent, especially after a rash of sickness traced to contaminated well water. One settler writes that without beer, our bellies groaned as loud as wolves, yet with it we found fortitude. By the 18th century, every American town boasts at least one brewery. Newspapers advertise healthful small beer for families and servants. George Washington's handwritten recipe for molasses-based porter still survives, scrawled between militia rosters, testament that revolutions march on stable hydration. Inside European laboratories, the Enlightenment's restless minds target beer for study. Joseph Priestley, while investigating gases in 1767, dangles a bowl of water above a brewery fermenter and discovers it fizzes pleasantly, carbonation. His friend Henry Cavendish isolates hydrogen in similar fashion. Beer thus nudges chemistry forward, one bubble at a time. Later, a French chemist by the name of Louis-Guillaume de Conick picks apart barley's starch chains in search of sugar yields, laying groundwork for calculating calories centuries before nutrition labels. Across the Rhine, Lavoisier's protégés weigh every grain before and after mash, proving nothing is lost in fermentation, only transformed. Philosophers debate free will. Brewers quietly validate conservation of mass. The Industrial Revolution roars to life, and steam power slams open new chapters. Iron mash tuns heat evenly, saving batches from scorch. Rotating rake arms stir grain as smoothly as monastery novices once did by hand. Most transformative of all, refrigeration machines invented by Carl von Linde in the 1870s let brewers control temperature year-round. Suddenly, lager, once a seasonal miracle dependent on alpine caves, becomes global. Cold fermented, crystal clear, biologically stable, lager marches into teeming factory cities where cholera still skulks in tenement pumps. A tall glass in a smoky Munich beer hall is more than refreshment. It's a quiet promise that tomorrow's workday won't be derailed by typhoid. Yet beer's influence is not purely benevolent.
Colonial authorities sometimes enforce barley cultivation on regions where water scarcity punishes subsistence crops, chasing tax revenue at humanitarian cost. In the Belgian Congo, forced laborers on rubber plantations receive beer rations laced with sedatives to dull revolt. Critics pen pamphlets naming beer the blindfold of empire. But even those tracts concede that without boiled hopped drink, the mortality rate among conscripted workers would be higher still, a grim calculus of exploitation balanced against sanitation.
Resistance movements flip the script. In the Caribbean, emancipated communities create small-batch breweries using sorghum and local herbs, reclaiming economic agency sip by sip. In Ireland, nationalist poets toast rebels with pint glasses, their wreathing foam a silent pledge that freedom, like fermentation, bubbles from within. Beer becomes metaphor as much as medicine, proof that transformation lurks inside patience and pressure.
Let's breathe away from politics and duck into a Bavarian beer garden circa 1890. Chestnut trees cast stippled shade across communal tables. Brass bands noodle waltzes while servers hoist stoneware steins the size of helmets. Toddlers sip shandies half-cut with lemonade. Grandmothers clink glasses of dunkel, everyone laughing beneath a blue-white flag. Hidden in that scene is a health triumph. Munich's River Isar, once a carrier of cholera spores, is now largely ignored by drinkers who choose beer brewed under strict purity laws. City physicians chart dramatic declines in waterborne outbreaks compared to towns still reliant on open wells. Sociologists coin liquid social capital to describe trust built when neighbors gather knowing the shared beverage will not betray them. Turn a few calendar pages to Copenhagen, where visionary brewer J.C. Jacobsen founds the Carlsberg Laboratory. He invites chemist Emil Hansen to isolate a single pure yeast culture, revolutionizing consistency. Before long, Carlsberg's Saccharomyces carlsbergensis circles the planet in test tubes, beating microbes of decay in every barrel it touches. Brewers swap samples by train, clipper, telegraph, a microscopic league united by the mission of fault-free fermentation. Pasteur, observing from Paris, publishes Études sur la liée, declaring definitively that microorganisms, once invisible culprits, can be mastered. Within a decade, municipal leaders in London and Chicago push for pasteurized milk and chlorinated water, inspired in part by brewing's microbial success story. Beer's triumph over dirty water nudges society toward universal sanitation. Skeptics remain. The temperance movement, furious at alcohol's darker excesses, domestic violence, factory accidents, squandered wages, paints even mild beer as a gateway to ruin. Posters show children begging drunken fathers for bread. Prohibitionists gather scientific data skewed toward urban gin dens, ignoring low-alcohol small beer's protective role in tenement districts. Debates flare hot. Is beer salvation or scourge? Doctors publish dueling papers. Preachers thunder from pulpits. Brewers commission genteel ads of wholesome farm families smiling over foaming mugs. Amid the rhetoric, one truth persists. Where beer disappears, but clean water infrastructure lags, disease mortality ticks upward. Chicago's 1854 cholera spike and Maine's well-intentioned but disastrous 1851 Dry Act both reinforce the lesson taught since medieval times. Take away safe drink without replacing it, and microbes rush into the void. Eventually, public works catch up. Municipal filtration, chlorine, and later ozone disinfection turn tap handles into fountains of safety. Beer relinquishes its monopoly on hydration yet refuses to vanish.
Instead, it reinvents itself as companion rather than caretaker. Flavor first, safety now assumed. Craft brewers resurrect medieval grits, smoky porters, and tarred farmhouse ales, not to fend off dysentery, but to honor heritage. They print stories on labels, of monks who saw God in yeast, of sailors who crossed oceans, of villages lifted from despair by frothy hope. Picture a modern festival in Bruges. Tourists shuffle past Gothic spires toward a tasting tent where a brewer in linen tunic recreates 14th century cuit, pouring amber liquid that smells of cloves and nostalgia. He recounts how his ancestors survived plague years by trusting this very recipe. Every sip a liquid footnote in humanity's epidemiological diary. Phones flash, hashtags bloom, and somewhere a public health scholar smiles. Storytelling still ferries wisdom long after statistics fade. So, as twilight splashes rose gold across the surf and the ship's bell signals another watch completed, remember the barrels cradled in the dark beneath your feet, ancient armor against unseen foes. Beer has escorted empires into being, stitched cultures together, and quietly tutored science in the language of microbes. It is global proof that sometimes the simplest alchemy, grain, water, heat, patience, can outwit nature's deadliest ambushes. Steam whistles shriek in the gray dawn as iron wheels smash sparks against slick rails outside Manchester's Spinningfields district. In a red brick courtyard that smells of coal smoke and boiled mash, towering copper kettles glow like sunrise trapped indoors. Burly men in leather aprons maneuver shovel after shovel of coke beneath the furnace, and far above their heads a spider web of newfangled pipes hisses with hot vapor. Welcome to the industrial brewhouse, where Victorians marry age-old yeast to cutting-edge machinery, and where beer, once village guardian and sailor's salvation, now girds an exploding urban world against the unseen armies of dirty water. Factory life in the 1840s is a collision of miracles and miseries. On one hand, spinning frames churn cloth faster than history has ever imagined. Iron bridges vault rivers in graceful spans, and telegraph wires sling news across continents at the speed of lightning. On the other, tenement courtyards stink of refuse, soot settles on every windowsill, and city wells, crowded by outhouses and slaughterhouses, turn into cauldrons of contagion. Cholera stalks cobblestone alleys like a nightmare made flesh, dropping strong men in a matter of hours. Policemen pin black crepe to helmets when outbreaks flare, so widows can hail help at once. Against that backdrop, the industrial brewery is both sanctuary and science lab. Step through its iron doors. The roar is deafening, half waterfall, half locomotive. Mechanical rakes stir tons of grain in circular mash tuns the size of cottages, powered by the same steam engines that drive cotton mills down the road. Above them, a grand clock regulates staggered shifts. Workers joke it's big malt, forever ticking toward the next sparge. Precision is the new password. Thermometers imported from France slide into brass sleeves. Hydrometers, invented by Scotsman Thomas Thomson, float in glass cylinders, reading sugar density down to half a degree. What monks once gauged by prayer and palate, engineers now plot on charts. Yet, despite all the pistons and pressure gauges, the core objective remains medieval: transform suspect water into safe nourishment. Manchester's River Irwell is too foul even for fire hoses. Brewers bypass it entirely, drilling artesian wells deep beneath glacial gravel. They pump iron-stained water into filtration towers of sand and charcoal, then blast it through steam coils that boil away pathogens before the mash gets its first stir. The resulting beer isn't just safer than city pump water, it's infinitely safer than the laudanum-laced gin that tempts exhausted mill hands after 16-hour shifts. Reformers like Elizabeth Gaskell pen novels warning of gin shop despair, while quietly praising honest mild ale as a family staple. Enter Louis Pasteur, striding through Parisian laboratories in 1857 with frock coat dusted in chalk. Peering into his microscope, he proves what brewers long suspected. Fermentation is life, not chemistry. He identifies yeast as the hero and, crucially, acid-loving bacteria as the villain that sours finished beer. Pasteur races to Munich to lecture at Spaten Brewery, where master brewer Gabriel Sedlmayr nods gravely, copies notes, and directs a sterilization chamber that bathes every hose and valve in live steam. Soon, continental breweries emulate the protocol. Infection rates nosedive, shelf life doubles, export markets bloom. British newspapers scoff at French fussiness until entire shipments go sour on the voyage to India, forcing them to retrofit lines with scalding jets too. Those improvements ripple outward into public health policy. When Dr. John Snow maps London's 1854 Broad Street cholera outbreak, he discovers something uncanny. Employees of a nearby brewery who drank nothing but house ale remain unscathed while neighbors perish. His famous removal of the pump handle becomes textbook legend. But tucked in his report is a footnote crediting brewery sanitation as unintentional vaccine. Politicians read Snow, read Pasteur, then convene committees. By the 1870s, civic councils in Liverpool, Boston, and Sydney are debating municipal water pipes lined with coal tar, high-temperature steam sterilization, and even the controversial notion of chemical disinfection. Each debate references the brewing example, proof that boiling and closed-pipe transport defeat disease. Meanwhile, the temperance movement gathers steam of its own, moral, not mechanical. In smoky church basements, women wave pamphlets depicting factory fathers wasting wages on tankards while toddlers shiver barefoot. They lump beer with gin under the catch-all sin of ardent spirits, ignoring the crucial distinction of potency. At rallies, teetotal lecturers wield blue ribbon badges and thunder that water, pure, God-given water, is all humankind needs. Brewers reply with quietly shamefaced laughter. They know God's water now sluices through culverts clogged with horse carcasses and dye works. In 1851, the state of Maine enacts total prohibition. Within a year, typhoid cases jump. Newspaper editors waffle between blaming immigrants and admitting untreated wells might be treacherous. 2 years later, Maine backpedals, allowing low-alcohol temperance beer. Disease rates retreat. Statistics speak where ideology shouts. Across the Atlantic, American frontier towns strike a different bargain. The logging camp at Eau Claire, Wisconsin, for instance, contracts a German émigré named Gottlieb Hirschhorn to build a brewhouse next to the sawmill. His employer calculates that each barrel of 3% lager prevents the equivalent of 4 workdays lost to dysentery. Barrel hoops clang, yeast froths, and pine-scented air mingles with malt. Lumberjacks still boast of drinking contests, but paymasters tally productivity, not hangovers, and decide the math favors beer. Science pushes further. In Copenhagen, Emil Christian Hansen at Carlsberg Laboratory isolates a single-cell yeast culture so pure it gets numbered like a rifle, yeast number 1. When he shares slants of this strain across Europe, Pilsners turn brilliantly clear and stably crisp.
Public demand skyrockets for glassware because suddenly you can see right through your drink. A transparency that doubles as a metaphor for microbial safety. Gone are the cloudy dregs that once concealed risk. Clarity sells peace of mind.
We zoom to Brussels, 1897, where an international exhibition showcases marvels of sanitation. The Belgian pavilion features tiled brew kettles you could eat from, and a live demonstration of wort being piped through sealed copper coils into fermenters scrubbed with caustic soda. Crowds applaud as lab-coated workers draw samples into sterile flasks, swirl them under microscopes connected to lantern slide projectors, and reveal a field of dancing yeast shaped like tiny lemons. School children gasp. A poster nearby reads, "Microbes are invisible. Good brewing makes them powerless." The phrase lodges in a generation's psyche, nudging governments toward germ-based public health campaigns. Still, technology alone can't bottle social change. In the soot-black Midlands, pub doors remain male territory, while factory women sip ginger beer in cramped kitchens. Industrial brewers launch family ale at half strength, urging mothers to serve it with supper. Some activists condemn the pitch as cynical infantilization. Others welcome a beverage demonstrably safer than pump water. Over decades, as municipal filtration finally purifies taps, family ale shifts from necessity to tradition, then sticks around purely for taste. A liquid heirloom of crisis resolved.
Turn the page to World War I. Muddy trenches weave across France like infected scars, and potable water behind the lines is a logistical nightmare. Field hospitals run short of antiseptics. Enter British Army Captain Horace K. Browning, who requisitions surplus mild ale to irrigate wounds when sterile saline runs out. Laboratory tests in Rouen confirm what folklore hinted. Hopped, lightly alcoholic beer inhibits bacterial colonies better than swamp water injected with iodine crystals. Commanders remain skeptical until casualty reports show fewer cases of gas gangrene where Browning's ale lavage is trialed. Military quartermasters scramble to reclassify beer from luxury to medical supply, careful to cap ABV below mutiny fueling levels.
Across the wire, German troops rely on lager convoys shipped in armored railcars from Munich and Dortmund. An intercepted diary from a Bavarian infantryman marvels that even lukewarm beer tastes of home and steadies nerves when artillery pounds the horizon. More telling is his note that water barrels, though inspected, still sicken men, whereas beer, however thin, keeps patrols on their feet. War departments study these anecdotes, and by 1917, both sides include brewery engineers in logistics staffs, tasked with ensuring portable steam rigs can boil and ferment near the front. The same modernity that unleashes machine guns leans on ancient fermentation to preserve muscle and morale. Peace returns, but temperance zeal supercharged by wartime sacrifice erupts in the United States as nationwide prohibition. Brewers shudder, pour yeast down drains, and watch tuberculosis spike in slums denied cheap, antiseptic beer. Bootleggers sprint in to fill the void with high-proof moonshine, while chain-smoked speakeasy cocktails drown sorrow. Doctors quietly lobby Congress for exemptions, brandishing charts showing pediatric diarrhea soaring in tenement blocks stripped of soft beer. A compromise emerges, near beer capped at 0.5% alcohol. Yet, without proper equipment, bootleg near beer ferments further in bottle, reaching dangerous pressures and, ironically, higher ABV. Public trust plummets. By the time repeal rolls in 1933, even church temperance leagues concede that regulated beer is safer than outlawed poison. Repeal's brewers face lean years, but their comeback dovetails with breakthroughs in antibiotics. Penicillin steals headlines, yet quietly, brewing science teaches pharmacologists about submerged fermentation, how to grow vast quantities of microorganisms in stainless tanks. Flasks once bubbling with wort now culture mold. Beer indirectly gifts the world its first mass-produced wonder drug. And doctors who once debated the morality of ale toast success with subdued pints in hospital canteens. We arrive in 1950s Tokyo. The city, rising from war's ashes, struggles with hepatitis from unchlorinated wells. The National Health Ministry partners with Asahi Brewing to distribute lightly hopped 2% table beer in working-class wards until municipal pipes catch up. The initiative halves waterborne infections within 3 years. Newspapers call it the golden bridge to modern hygiene. Historians will later debate correlation versus causation. Residents remember only that the bittersweet taste meant hope during gasoline-scarred summers. By the late 20th century, global health finally tips in favor of treated water. Chlorine, ozone, UV, each technology outpaces pathogens. Beer might retire from its centuries-long public health post, except it refuses. Instead, it reinvents itself as storyteller and memory keeper. Craft brewers resurrect extinct strains, replicate medieval groots, and age sours in wine-soaked barrels, narrating history through flavor. Epidemiologists sip flights at conferences, joking that their discipline owes yeast eternal royalties. Consider modern Rwanda, where rural clinics lacking reliable purification equipment teach villagers to brew quick-cycle sorghum beer. Even at 1.5% alcohol, the beverage reduces childhood diarrhea by 30%. Solar pasteurizers are en route, but until infrastructure arrives, beer again stands sentinel. The circle closes. From medieval hamlets dodging dysentery to 21st century villages fighting E. coli, the recipe, fire, grain, patience, remains a humble talisman. Look now at a nanobrewery in Copenhagen using CRISPR to edit yeast genomes for enhanced B vitamin output. Their pilot batches, destined for refugee camps, promise hydration, micronutrients, and microbial safety in one recyclable pouch. Technology pirouettes back to ancient necessity. Somewhere, a monk from 1150 would smile. The tools have changed, not the mission. So when you lift a glass today, clear as crystal or hazy with heritage, you grip more than leisure. You trace a lineage across midnight monasteries, rolling decks, steam-driven kettles, and lab benches bright with microscopes. You honor nameless alewives fined by ale-conners, sailors who cheered landfall, factory hands spared cholera, trench medics improvising antisepsis, and citizens whose city pumps finally ran clear. Morning sunlight filters through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a sleek biotech lab in Leuven, Belgium, glinting off rows of stainless steel fermenters that hum like contented bees. Inside each vessel, trillions of yeast cells banquet on sugars, while a computerized dashboard watches over temperature swings to the 10th of a degree. Nearby, petri dishes stamped with QR codes cradle bacterial colonies coaxed from human intestines. Lactobacillus rhamnosus here, Bifidobacterium longum there, each destined for an audacious experiment.
brewing beer not merely as a safe beverage, but as a finely tuned delivery system for beneficial microbes that can rebuild the gut itself.
If that sounds like something a medieval monk might chalk up to divine revelation, today's microbiologists frame it in base pairs and metabolic pathways. Since the turn of the millennium, DNA sequencers have stripped humanity's inner ecosystem bare, revealing that every sip and crumb we swallow edits a rainforest-rich community residing from tongue to colon. When researchers at the Human Microbiome Project published their first maps, physicians blinked. Dysbiosis, an imbalance in gut flora, correlated with everything from allergies to depression. Suddenly, the ancient link between safe drink and sturdy bodies unfolded under fluorescence microscopes. All those centuries when beer kept villages alive. It wasn't just the boiling or the alcohol. Malt, hops, and yeast carried a parade of friendly microbes and soluble fibers that quietly fed the colon's microscopic citizens. Enter Dr. Anjali Rao, lead scientist of Leuven Bioferment. She points to a chromatogram tracing the rise of indole 3-propionic acid, a neuroprotective compound, during fermentation with a rare Himalayan Saccharomyces strain. "We're not making beer healthier," she says, smiling behind safety goggles. "We're making health taste like beer." Her team has engineered a low-alcohol saison whose final gravity preserves live lactobacilli, delivering a probiotic punch without slipping into sourness. Early clinical trials with Crohn's patients show reduced flare-ups when a daily 250 milliliter bottle accompanies meals. Test subjects describe the regimen as the easiest medicine they've ever swallowed. The concept takes root beyond Europe. In Nairobi, a social enterprise called Vitagrain repurposes surplus sorghum, once fetching pennies at market, into lightly fermented uja brew. Packaged in solar pasteurized pouches, each 500 milliliter serving supplies electrolytes, B vitamins, and a curated microbiome starter. Health clinic data from Kibera slum show a 28% drop in childhood diarrheal episodes where uja brew replaces untreated borehole water. Local women's cooperatives earn profit on every batch, blurring the line between public health intervention and micro-industrial renaissance. Of course, the microbiome age doesn't erase beer's long-shadowed risks. In a Los Angeles addiction center, counselor Miguel Reyes clicks through MRI scans revealing how chronic high ABV consumption still erodes gray matter, microbiome benefits or not. But Reyes also shows slides of moderate drinkers, those 2-pint-per-day folk whose gut bacteria spectra glow with diversity, their inflammatory markers lower than teetotal neighbors hooked on sugary colas. The dose, he reminds his group, is the difference between poison and potion. It's a line Paracelsus wrote 5 centuries ago, now reincarnated in neural imaging and 16S rRNA sequencing. While urban clinics fine-tune gut ecology, engineers in Cape Town wrestle with a more brutal challenge: day zero water scarcity. Prolonged drought has lowered reservoirs to bathtub rings. Municipal pipes sputter. Emergency planners look to breweries, whose reverse osmosis units can polish wastewater into brew-ready liquor far cleaner than most tap sources. During 2026 rationing drills, SAB Miller's Newlands plant runs its purification line 24/7, bottling a non-alcoholic resilience lager for distribution at city shelters. Volunteers hand out cans stamped with dual labels. One side the brewery's logo, the other the municipal seal. Public-private partnership rendered in aluminum and outsized gratitude. Parents queuing for allotments trust the familiar hiss of a beer can opened, even if this brew barely nudges 0.3% ABV. Safety, once again, travels under malt's comforting scent. Meanwhile, climate scientists eye how rising temperatures threaten traditional hops. Alpha acid yields shrink as heat stress wilts Bavarian fields. Pacific Northwest farms battle mildew. Hop breeders cross old land races with desert-tolerant wild vines, racing to birth cultivars that hold bitterness under 40-degree skies. Some labs pivot to hopless beer, coaxing engineered yeast to synthesize humulone analogs during fermentation, replicating classic flavor while skipping agricultural strain. Purists recoil, no bristly green cones, but water-scarce regions cheer any method that trims irrigation. A pilot plant in Abu Dhabi demonstrates full-scale production using desalinated seawater and zero hops. It's beer's cooling construction crews who once risked heat stroke beneath shimmering glass towers. As planetary boundaries tighten, another frontier beckons, 78 million kilometers away. At SpaceX's Starbase launch pad, a stainless rocket groans under cryogenic load. Packed among scientific payloads is the Bioferment Astro module. 6 miniaturized conical fermenters, freeze-dried barley malt, and a yeast strain selected for cosmic radiation resistance. The mission? Test whether controlled fermentation can furnish future Mars settlers with a pathogen-free, morale-lifting beverage while recycling exhaled CO2 into ethanol and, eventually, potable water via distillation. NASA psychologists champion the trial. Their research shows that communal rituals, breaking bread, raising glasses, anchor sanity during prolonged isolation. If early colonists managed to toast a crimson sunset through dome windows, they'll echo Viking sailors, medieval nuns, and lunar astronauts who clinked metal juice tubes in 1969. The vessel changes, the impulse stays constant. Back on Earth, in a small lab perched above Bogotá's cloud line, agronomist Catalina Mejia ferments quinoa into a sparkling cerveza andina designed for altitude-dwelling communities whose glacial meltwaters now swarm with livestock runoff. Each bottle contains live Pediococcus cultures extracted from traditional chicha starters, capable of suppressing E. coli in vitro. Mejia's partner, epidemiologist Raul Santos, tracks health metrics in remote schools. Absenteeism halves after cerveza andina becomes the midday drink, even though alcohol lingers at a mere 1%. Parents initially balk at children sipping beer. Village elders remind them that Incan armies marched on corn brew thicker than soup. The modern twist is data charts pinned beside the chalkboard, green bars rising where red once bled. Not every innovation wins applause. In London's Shoreditch district, a startup markets detox IPA fortified with activated charcoal, spirulina, and an entire day's probiotic quota. Social media influencers gush, gastroenterologists groan. Charcoal can bind medications, they warn, and hop polyphenols inhibit the very microbes the bottle boasts. But hype sells out the first run, prompting regulators to clamor for clearer labeling. The episode revives an age-old tension: beer as food versus beer as fad. History whispers caution. Remember when Victorians spiked porter with cocculus? Science, brandishing randomized trials, slowly corrects the market, just as ale conners once sat in puddles to test sugar levels. Beyond commercial headlines, humanitarian agencies quietly adopt ultra-small beer in refugee camps where chlorine drops cannot conquer turbidity. Engineers from Doctors Without Borders lug collapsible plastic fermenters, picture oversized backpacking bladders, into a Syrian settlement near the Turkish border. Powered by solar mats, low-wattage immersion heaters raise water to pasteurization thresholds before barley extract and yeast enter the mix. 4 days later, aid workers dispense a lightly fizzy drink in reusable cups. Gastrointestinal clinics report immediate declines in dehydration cases among toddlers. The operation costs a fraction of shipping bottled water and fosters local agency. Refugees oversee batches troubleshooting gravity readings with handheld refractometers, claiming a rare domain of control in lives otherwise cornered by uncertainty. Meanwhile, university ethics boards wrestle with the legacy of colonial brewing. Scholars trace how 19th century empires used rationed beer to pacify labor while exporting barley monocultures that displaced indigenous crops. Reparative projects arise. In Queensland, First Nations entrepreneurs partner with microbiologists to resurrect native yam daisy fermentation, creating a low-alcohol Murnong ale sold at community pubs. Profits feed language revitalization classes. Every label prints a word from the Woiwurrung lexicon. Drink as cultural restitution. The pendulum swings again. Inside Silicon Valley's polished campuses, another transformation bubbles. Software engineers fueled by energy drinks develop metabolic syndrome by 30. HR departments pilot mindful micro-tap rooms that swap kegerators of double IPAs for modest saisons capped at 3%. Employees book 15-minute reflection breaks, swirling tulip glasses while journaling gratitude. An irony not lost on medievalists who note that Benedictines practiced the same moderation in scriptoriums a millennium ago. The difference? Smartwatches now buzz if heart rate variability suggests stress, nudging the user toward the taproom's kombucha beer hybrid. Trace alcohol, live cultures, zero caffeine. Wellness apps ping, stock prices soar, and yeast continues its silent tutelage in resilience. The microbiome renaissance ventures further into oncology wards. At Memorial Sloan Kettering, Dr. Sho Tanaka leads a double-blind trial pairing immunotherapy with a non-alcoholic porter steeped in beta-glucan-rich oats and inoculated with fecal bacterium prausnitzii. Early findings: patients drinking the porter maintain gut barrier integrity through chemotherapy, reducing infection risk. Tanaka's team sterilizes each batch in cans gamma-irradiated for hospital delivery, proof that fermentation science can dance with aseptic protocols rather than clash. In a quieter wing of the hospital, palliative care nurse Leela Ahmed wheels an elderly man to a rooftop garden. She pours him a denitas of tart Berliner Weiss infused with raspberry puree. He savors a sip, eyes softening. "Tastes like summer when I was 6, he whispers. An hour later, he sleeps easier. Leela logs the effect under reminiscence therapy. As databases crunch outcomes, a truth emerges. Safe, gentle beer still excels at stitching memory to comfort, immune systems to optimism. Throughout these fast-evolving chapters, water infrastructures finally catch global stride. By 2050, desalination plants ring arid coastlines, and UV LED purifiers slot under every rural sink. Yet, even as taps gleam with safety, breweries thrive, not out of necessity, but because their centuries-old ethos of communal trust proves timeless. Whether in skyscraper lounges or Andean villages, sharing a fermented cup lowers shoulders and raises conversation. Microbes, it turns out, are social catalysts inside and outside the gut. And so we arrive at a curious convergence. The ancient brew that once guarded medieval orphans from foul wells now partners with gene editing, climate resilience, and space exploration. The common thread remains stubbornly simple. Apply heat, invite microbes, wait with patience, then pass the result hand to hand. Civilization keeps revisiting this ritual, like a song whose chorus outlives every generation of singers. Lead floor panels ripple with animated barley fields beneath your feet as you step into Brewverse, the world's first fully immersive virtual tasting hall. A pale blue glow spills from vaulted holographic ceilings, and avatars, human, otter, dragon, whatever username Whimsy selects, raise shimmering goblets that pixel fizz with golden liquid. Somewhere, servers hum, whipping terabytes of sensory data into real-time aroma cues routed through a desktop diffuser or a head-mounted scent cartridge. But the most astonishing part isn't the graphics or the scent tech. It's that every glass contains beer brewed without ever touching a grain of barley, a drop of water, or a kilowatt of off-site energy. Welcome to the zero-waste frontier, where beer's age-old role as guardian of public health morphs into guardian of the planet itself. The story starts far from neon cyberspace in an unassuming bioreactor farm on the outskirts of Rotterdam. Picture rows of towering stainless cylinders bathed in soft green light. Inside, genetically tuned microalgae feast on CO2 piped straight from a nearby cement plant. Unlike traditional malted barley, which demands fields, fertilizer, and months of weather luck, these algae double in mass every 16 hours, spinning protein, lipids, and complex carbohydrates from industrial exhaust and captured sunlight. When harvest day arrives, technicians separate starch-rich fractions destined for bioplastic and divert the remaining nutrient slurry to the fermentation wing. There, brewer's yeast, some classic Saccharomyces, some bespoke strains coaxed in CRISPR cribs, convert the algal sugars into ethanol and a carnival of flavor esters. No farmland, no irrigation, no pesticides. Carbon that once snarled in smokestacks exits the cycle as a tangy 0.5% citrus radler served in compostable algae plastic cups. Critics initially mocked smokestack shandy, but early adopters posted blood work receipts bragging lower LDL cholesterol and a microbiome bloom courtesy of the brew's soluble beta-glucans. Soon, climate-conscious cafes from Oslo to Osaka installed tabletop bioreactors the size of espresso machines, loading freeze-dried algae cartridges like eco-friendly K-cups. 12 hours of gentle hum yield a liter of fresh wort ready for in-situ fermentation. Patrons watch fermentation bubbles as hypnotically as latte foam, trusting that the drink before them siphoned greenhouse gases from the sky. Yet zero-waste ambitions extend beyond raw ingredients. Travel south to Melbourne, where Yarra Valley Water partners with a microbrewery to implement full circular pint operations. They upcycle spent grain into mycelium bricks, yes, building blocks grown by fungi. These lightweight slabs insulate the brewery's own cellar, reducing cooling loads. Carbon filters made from spent hops scrub VOCs from city air ducts. Even wastewater, once flushed down municipal lines, flows through anaerobic digesters that belch biogas to fire the kettle. At the end of each week, the brewery's ledger shows a power surplus. They sell kilowatt hours back to the grid. Beer as an energy plant that happens to pour a crisp Kölsch on tap. Meanwhile, non-alcoholic ferments become the darling of metropolitan wellness circles. Somewhere around 2030, metabolic researchers at Stanford identify a biomarker, call it GIR8, that flags subtle gut inflammation linked to late-night binge drinking, even at moderate ABV. Tech blogs declare war on ethanol. Stock prices of spirit conglomerates teeter. Craft brewers pivot like matadors. They resurrect a little-used process from the 1890s called arrested fermentation, only now guided by quantum sensors that detect ethanol molecules in picogram batches. The result? 0.3% quiet lagers loaded with the same hop-derived terpenes that flip calming neurotransmitter switches in the limbic brain. Drinkers report a gentle, rosy mental hush without the motor skill drag or hangover fog. TikTok wellness gurus christen it Mind Rest Brew, and supermarket end caps clear out within hours of launch. But taste alone cannot sustain revolution. Trust must permeate every milliliter. Enter the age of blockchain provenance. Each brew batch, whether algal, barley, or quinoa, earns a unique cryptographic hash etched into a decentralized ledger. Scan a QR tag on a can and watch a timeline unfold. Carbon source, batch yeast lineage, kilowatt hours consumed, even hourly sensor logs of pH drift. Supply chain scandals evaporate when every pallet can audit production. German beer purity law once limited ingredients to 3. Now data purity laws add the 4th element, transparent accountability. Digital tasting rooms like Brewverse flourish atop that trust. Users receive sensory docks, sleek desktop gadgets resembling vintage toasters. Dock a gleaming capsule and ultrasonic nozzles atomize a measured sip into microdroplets, delivered straight into the olfactory channel of your AR headset. Meanwhile, an AI sommelier may be shaped like a medieval alewife, maybe like a border collie in a bow tie, narrates malt lineage, hop terroir, and circular economy stats. Social scientist Jianli Xu observes that couples separated by oceans now enjoy remote cheers dates, clinking haptic mugs while swapping real-time metabolic feedback pulled from smart rings. Calories, electrolytes, serotonin precursors, all displayed in floating HUDs. Beer once protected villages from lethal microbes, now it protects long-distance relationships from emotional drought.
Not everyone hops on board. In Bavarian valleys, where abbeys still echo with Gregorian chants, tradition-minded monks view algalwort with suspicion. Brother Matthias, cellarer at Kloster Sankt Andreas, invites journalists into a cobwebbed coolship room lined with oak staves darkened by centuries of wild fermentations. Beer is the land's memory, he says, lifting a tulip glass of spontaneously fermented dunkel. You cannot debug nostalgia into yeast code. Yet even his monastery adopts solar arrays and recycles spent mash into cattle feed rich in protein. Purity, they concede, can walk hand in hand with planetary stewardship. Outside Guadalajara, agave farmers wrestle with their own twist on zero-waste brewing. Climate stress scorches blue Tecalana fields, prompting cooperative mezcaleros to interplant drought-resistant barley cultivars. They malt the barley under corrugated rooftops cooled by evaporative chimneys, blend it with roasted agave hearts, and ferment the hybrid must into a smoky 3% Coba Cerveza. Each batch sequesters carbon in biochar kilns, stoked by trimmed agave fronds, the char later buried to enrich depleted soils. Farmers measure revenue in a new dual currency ledger, pesos and carbon credits. World Bank case studies hail Coba Cerveza as regenerative finance disguised as Sunday refreshment.
Yet even as innovation sprints, water purity remains brittle in conflict zones. In war-torn regions where infrastructure crumbles overnight, NGOs deploy brewbox drones, ruggedized crates parachuted into refugee camps. Each box houses solar mats, collapsible fermenters, freeze-dried hop-free wort powder to dodge allergic triggers, and a sealed vial of Gamma Shield yeast resistant to dusty desert nights. Local volunteers unpack the box, collect scarce groundwater, flash pasteurize with parabolic mirrors, and ferment under triple-layer mylar tents. Within 48 hours, children sip safe, lightly soured beer laced with vitamin A and iron. Mortality curves bend downward before medical aid even crosses borders. From survival rations to cosmic toasts, the through line of beer's journey remains social glue. Sociologist Nuria Delgado studies remote gig workers glued to screens in shoebox apartments. She finds loneliness hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, spike after 8 hours of isolated labor. Her pilot program issues participants a weekly neighborhood brew passport. It unlocks a free 250 milliliter pour at any participating pub between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. Non-alcoholic or classic doesn't matter. What matters is the face-to-face handshake with the barkeep, the hum of conversation that resets neurological balance. Stress biomarkers plunge. Employers cover passport costs after calculating savings on mental health claims. Even in a metaverse world, carbon-based bodies still yearn to bend elbows beside other carbon-based bodies. Meanwhile, at the University of Nairobi's Institute for Water Resilience, doctoral candidate Aisha Mwangi perfects a real-time sensor array that monitors pathogenic RNA fragments in city reservoirs. Her algorithm flags spikes within minutes, triggering text alerts to breweries running inline pasteurization systems. Those breweries pivot production on the fly, allocating extra volume of near beer to neighborhood taps while municipal crews repair pipe breaches. Residents barely notice, only that the pub's mild has a slightly lighter body this week. Outbreak averted, data quietly logged, yeast again cast as first responder. Eco-ethicists raise eyebrows at the energy cost of virtual tasting halls. Brewverse counters by founding the One Sip, One Seed program. For every 1,000 server hours consumed, a mangrove sapling takes root in salt-scarred deltas. Drone footage of coastal nurseries streams live to VR lobbies where patrons sip their pixelated pours, watching real-time carbon mitigation unfold leaf by glossy leaf. The gesture evokes medieval tithe ale, where each pint funded church roof repairs. Only now, the roof is the entire atmosphere. On board the International Space Station, Commander Kazuo Watanabe floats in microgravity, conducting a toast with colleagues from 4 nations. Their pouches contain a foamy beverage brewed with barley grown in orbital hydroponic chambers. Less about tipsiness, more about closed-loop life support. The fermentation process scrubs CO2, yields potable water as a distillate byproduct, and lifts crew morale during the 6-month stint. Biosensors affixed to their rests record stable gut flora despite radiation-induced shifts. NASA declares the test pivotal for Mars base planning. Astronomers grin at the poetic symmetry. Medieval sailors navigated by stars while trusting beer for survival. Now astronauts navigate among stars and still trust beer's microbial magic. Back on terra firma, a coastal town in Maine confronts sea level rise. Salt water intrudes into freshwater aquifers, rendering well pumps undrinkable. Town council funds a community brack brew facility that desalinates seawater via low-energy forward osmosis before brewing it into Kolsch-style sea lager. Proceeds bankroll further resilience projects such as raised roadbeds and oyster reef breakwaters. Journalists dub the model climate adaptation you can taste. Residents simply enjoy that their traditions, Friday night fish fry with a cold one, continue unbroken even as tides lap higher. While municipal systems evolve, home brewing tools achieve sci-fi elegance. Countertop units named Yeasterleister or Malt M8 fit next to espresso machines, accepting cartridges of freeze-dried wort and yeast. NFC chips lock brewing profiles, ABV target, pH curve, hop aroma intensity. Steam sterilization cycles run automatically, leaving zero infection risk. Urban apartments too cramped for a dog now host mini brew days, each liter resource calibrated to sip rather than spill. Users share recipes in online forums where AI models predict flavor outcomes before anyone snaps a hydrometer reading. Homebrew once taught patience, now it teaches data literacy.
As all this unfolds, global beer symposiums dedicate keynote slots to cybersecurity. Why? Because a hacked brew plant could alter fermentation temps, pushing ABV beyond legal limits, or spawning off flavors that tank brand trust. White hat hackers demonstrate yeast spoofing, uploading rogue temperature set points to cloud-connected fermenters. In response, breweries adopt zero-trust architectures and multi-factor brew authentication, QR codes etched into titanium paddles that unlock PLC interfaces. The same digital scaffolding that tracks purity now defends it against sabotage.
Yet through tech mazes and carbon ledgers, the most potent safeguard remains the sip itself, shared, savored, slowed down. At a Tokyo rooftop bar covered in living moss, patrons sign a slow pint pledge, vow to nurse each glass for at least 20 minutes, letting carbonation tickle the nose and conversation wander. Neuroscientists rig EEG headbands to volunteers, measuring alpha wave blooms of calm more robust than quick guzzles. Breweries begin printing recommended sip cadence on labels, akin to yoga breathing guides. Inhale aroma 4 beats, sip 2 beats, exhale gratitude. Ancient monks who spoke of contemplative ale would nod. So the arc resolves. From medieval dirty water to climate-strained century, beer endures as adaptive shield. Boiled when boiling was rare, fermented when refrigeration was non-existent, carbon sequestering when carbon threatens all. It partners with gene science to heal guts, with blockchain to steady supply chains, with VR to knit distant hearts, and with algae to siphon poison from the air. Somewhere, yeast still floats unseen in sunlit dust, waiting for the next kettle, the next crisis, the next celebration. Red dust billows against a transparent dome as the sun slips beyond the Valles Marineris escarpment, turning the Martian sky a muted violet. Inside the settlement's communal hub, settlers dock their exosuits, shoulders sagging after another 12-hour cycle tending algae tanks and regolith gardens. One by one, they cross the polished basalt floor toward a low counter where a recycled steel keg gleams under warm LED lanterns. The tap hisses, releasing a faint scent of citrus and toasted grain, comforting, familiar, impossibly earth-like. No fanfare accompanies the pour. The ritual is older than passports, older than the word nation, older now than planetary boundaries. Cups meet, glimmer, and for a breathless instant, the colonists are not pioneers balancing life support statistics. They are simply neighbors, held in the same spell that once settled quarrels in Saxon longhouses and quieted nerves beneath hurricane lanterns on Atlantic decks. In a world where water arrived frozen and hostile, beer again performs its ancient sleight of hand. Danger transmuted into safety, scarcity into fellowship. Behind the counter, anaerobic chillers purr softly. Their fermenters are no larger than rain barrels, but each one twines two planets' histories into a single bubbling narrative. Barley seeds, descendants of Syrian landraces DNA edited for microgravity root stability, shake loose malt sugars, while a hybrid yeast perfected in Louvain hums through its metabolic ballet, converting carbon dioxide from crew breath into ethanol and that telltale lace of foam. Waste heat from the module's CO2 scrubbers keeps fermentation steady. The byproduct water, once condensed and mineral balanced, circles back to hydration packs. Every loop closes, every gram accounted for in the station's resource ledger. Yet none of that math shows up in the colonists' expressions as the first sip slides down. Eyes half close, brows unfurl. Conversation softens from technical shorthand to stories of home. The beer is only 2% ABV, exactly enough to flatten microbial risk far below any cognitive fog. It's not brewed for escape. It's brewed so the settlement's fragile web of psyches stays tight-knit. Hundreds of millions of kilometers away, on a Pacific archipelago whose highest ridge now peers nervously at rising tides, villagers gather under palm leaf canopies threaded with solar fairy lights. They too clutch mugs. This batch a tart pineapple sorghum ale, fermented in bioresin tanks and cooled by seawater loops. One of the elders, a woman whose grandfather memorized the constellations for wayfinding, stands to speak. She thanks the community fermenters for turning brackish well water into canoe beer, using local fruit acids to sharpen flavor and knock back Vibrio microbes thriving in warmer seas. Children chase each other between tables, their laughter undimmed by the fact that government tankers now deliver potable water only twice a month. The kegs aren't mere refreshment, they're a tide pool of stability in an ocean of flux. When the elder toasts absent cousins already resettled on higher ground, everyone drinks, and for 3 heartbeats, fear gives way to the identical hush felt beneath the Martian dome. Shift again, this time to a downtown studio apartment where a grad student, drained by gig economy shifts and dissertation angst, slides a cartridge into a countertop BioBrew unit. The machine whirs, scans her smartwatch for hydration level, blood glucose trend, circadian dip. It custom brews 250 milliliters of 0.4% chamomile lavender ale infused with a probiotic tailored to her microbiome's current gaps. Steam coils around her succulents as she watches the vessel fill. 15 minutes ago, the liquid was tap water and a teaspoon of freeze-dried wort powder. Now it's a firewall against insomnia and the cling of energy drink crash. She curls on the windowsill, city lights flickering like coded constellations, and feels her pulse settle into a tempo older than her urban skyline. In the database, the brew registers as Batch 1407B Micro-Rest, time-stamped, traceable, zero waste. For her, it is one more proof that safety and softness can still fit in a palm-sized glass. Through these vignettes, rust-red horizon, salt-torn shore, concrete skybox, the same undercurrent pulses. Humanity remains part chemistry, part choreography. We build machines that scaffold life, but the glue between individual and collective is usually poured, not programmed. Beer's genius has never been molecular complexity. It lies in timing, in meeting vulnerability the moment it appears. In medieval hamlets, it answered dysentery. During industrial booms, it tamed cholera. In trenches, it sanitized shell-shock chatter. In refugee camps, it demotes pathogens before medics arrive. Now, on a planet wobbling between tech promise and ecological reckoning, it turns carbon capture into conversation starter, blockchain opacity into shared ledger, loner avatars into couch-laughing friends. Some futurists predict a day when handheld sterilizers render all beverages safe, when synthetic neurotonics outcompete malt for mood regulation, when augmented reality simulates communion so accurately the liquid becomes redundant. Perhaps. Yet behavioral economists note a different trend. Even in cities with flawless water grids, sales of moderate beer climb whenever blackouts force neighbors onto candlelit balconies. The drink is as much punctuation as potion, a sensory comma inviting us to inhale before the next clause of daily survival. If a silicon wafer could do that, translate relief across tongue, nostril, ear, and memory, it would deserve its own song. Until then, bubbles will do the talking.
Picture a timeline stretched like a brewer's louter tune, false bottom lined with epochs instead of slotted plates. First wort trickles out. Grain, fire, clay pots. Next runnings draw amber threads of guilds, monasteries, clipper ships. Later sparges swirl with steam engines, microscopes, assembly lines, gigabytes. Each pull clarifies but never exhausts the mash. There is always another rinse, another infusion of hope. Today we open the ton's final valve. Climate loops, interplanetary migration, quantum fermentation. And what flows bears the imprint of every earlier extraction. Still sweet with starches of kinship. Still bitter just enough to remind us vigilance tastes better shared.
What then of dirty water itself? In some regions it is mostly a memory, chronicled in museum mock-ups of 19th century cholera wards. Elsewhere it lurks in flooded subway tunnels or drought-cracked reservoirs, a reminder that infrastructure is a promise renewed each sunrise. The beauty of beer's lesson is portability. You can brew in copper kettles or plastic sacks, with barley or algae, using solar heat or geothermal steam. You can do it in a monastery cool ship open to orchard breezes, or in a sealed fermenter orbiting at 27,000 kph. The recipe is less important than the resolution. Boil what endangers, invite microbes that heal. Give the result to one another so no one drinks fear alone. Approach the settlement bar on Mars again. Night has deepened. Earth a pale star low on the horizon. The last pour of the cycle is called the dreamer's dram, portioned small, laced with valerian esters to coax restful sleep within humming habitat walls. Glasses raised, colonists recite a toast taught during launch orientation. To the first well dug, to the last glass shared, may nothing unspoken poison the water between us. It is equal parts oath and lullaby. They sip. Foam traces crescent moons on their upper lips. Within minutes, gravity's frail cousin rocks them to bunks, where recycled air will hiss like distant surf. Tomorrow they will maintain oxygen gardens, calibrate rover pneumatics, manage code for asteroid tracking AI. But tonight, a low-alcohol brew has done what algorithms can't, convinced the heart it is home, even under an alien sky. Our journey, dear listener, has wandered from shadowy medieval alleys to steam-choked foundries, from biotech clean rooms to virtual taverns, from riverfront brewhouses to red planet refuges. At every waypoint, the story stayed faithful to one unflashy miracle. When people cannot trust the water, they bind green to heat and patience, and outflows a quieter, safer tomorrow. That miracle is older than language, yet nimble enough to sprint alongside CRISPR and carbon markets.
It asks little, just stewardship, moderation, a willingness to share. And it returns much. Immune peace, social glue, a moment of we in a century shouting me.
If drowsiness now nestles behind your eyes like sediment settling after the last swirl of a glass, allow it. Let the soft fizz of imaginary kegs become white noise that smooths the creases of worry. Inhale once more. Maybe you catch phantom notes of malt, hops, or the faint ozone of Martian dusk. And exhale, trusting that the oldest alchemy still guards the threshold between daylight struggle and restorative dark. Thank you for keeping me company on this long pour through history. May your dreams be clear, your mornings refreshingly crisp. And may the waters you wake to, whatever planet, whatever decade, always be rendered safe by knowledge, kindness, and, when needed, a humble cup raised in fellowship. Good night and cheers.